It's my pleasure today to speak with the executive team from Atlancis. Atlancis is one of our strongest solution providers in the region and based out of Kenya. Joining me today is Daniel Njuguna, who is the co-founder and CEO of Atlancis, Joe Kanyua, who is the Chief Technology Evangelist, and Paul Statham, who is the Regional Commercial Director for Atlancis. So thank you all for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Great. So why don't you all just take a minute, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in Atlancis and the IT industry in general. So Dan, you want to kick it off?
Thank you, Steve. My name is Daniel Jaguna. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Atlancis Technologies. I've been in IT for about 15 years, firstly as a Unix and database engineer, working in telcos. And thereafter, I transitioned into Atlancis when we founded the company back in 2011. So my passion is around open technologies, and I'm happy to be on this conversation.
Great. Joe?
Yes, Steve, thank you for the question. I've been in the technology world for approximately 20 years now, if I count also my university years, because I was studying computer science from day one since I matriculated at the university. So even my student years, I count them because those are the formative stages. But ever since I graduated, as early as the year 2005, I've worked in technology-related positions, whether it's a development software engineering, whether it's business analysis from an IT perspective, solution architecture, enterprise architecture, sales engineering. I've worked in the telco industry. I've also worked for a couple of multinationals, specifically Oracle and SAP, and held very different positions across the 14, 15 years of my experience. So I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist here at Atlancis. I'm a newbie, pretty much, but not in terms of what the job requires me to do. This is what I've done in many of the years. And I pretty much look forward to driving the agenda, especially around open computing, which is an exciting area I want to be in.
Great.
So thank you, Steve.
Great. And Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Great to chat with you again. So my career now spans 30 years. This is the 30th year, and ironically started off with Dell Computers and then Fujitsu on the OEM side of the business and migrating into the business process outsourcing with Fujitsu. The Fujitsu career took me from England to Australia, and then in 2009 a passion for Africa led me to join some telcos in East Africa, in Tanzania and Kenya, Liquid Telecom. A couple of years ago, I spent 18 months in the South Pacific with a mobile operator called Digicel, and then came back home to Kenya and working with Atlancis and loving the open compute story. I think it's one of the most compelling messages I've ever had in my toolkit as a salesperson to talk to customers about, and enjoying being part of the open community and being part of Atlancis.
Oh, this is great. I love the diverse background of all three of you. So Dan, question for you. The name of the company is Atlancis. So tell us, how did you come up with that name, or what is the background of that name? And then a little bit about the size and the services that you provide in the markets that you address.
Thank you, Steve. So Atlancis, as the name came about because of our experience with what the customers were going through in our times of giving them services and solutions, especially in their data centers. So over time, we realized that customers have a lot of technology burden than they carry, and they always want to work with a partner or a solution provider that can help them implement solutions, give them support, and be able to offer them to keep their lights on so that they can concentrate on doing their core business. So Atlancis as a name is from, if you know the Greek mythology, there's a Greek god called Atlas, and Atlas was condemned by Zeus to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. So in that analogy, Atlancis carries the weight of our customers' technology burden, so that we can help them concentrate on their core business. Then the NCIS is basically what we do: network, cloud, infrastructure, and software. So it's an acronym of two parts: Atlas and what we normally do in terms of data center, whether it's network, cloud, infrastructure, and software solutions. So that's the origin of the name Atlancis. So across different verticals, we deliver data center solutions. Traditionally, we were doing these around OEM-based technologies, but over the last 3 years, we've made it 100% of our focus to concentrate on open compute, and we've standardized all our solutions around open compute solutions, whether it's data center, networking, whether storage, and many other facets of the DC, including the infrastructure, the physical data center space. All our solutions are centered around open compute standards, and we are happy to be the pioneering company in Africa doing this, and very good traction so far. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that you are very early adopters and forward thinking when it comes to open infrastructure. And there's a lot of messaging around open infrastructure, and people have different definitions. So what is your definition at Atlancis for open infrastructure?
I'll take that question, Steve. I think the best way for people to understand open computing is to contrast it with what very many people know about open source software. I think if you say open computing, few people will understand, but when you say open source software, it's a phrase that's very common. And the whole purpose why open source software became very, very popular and applicable in businesses as well as in consumerized computing is because of the obvious advantages of, number one, the speed of innovation. When something is not bound by the shackles of proprietary, it's not put behind brick walls with limitations, then you invite innovation, and innovation can come from anywhere. So you have a lot of software engineers and developers contributing to what eventually becomes distributable versions of open source software. Then with open source software, then anyone can be able to take the base code and be able to build on it. So it means that the designs are shareable, and that they can be consumed, they can be improved at a very, very rapid pace. So if you bring the same merits to the open compute side, and in this case, we are talking about the infrastructure layer that touches the computing, the server, the networking, as well as the storage, then you'll see that this is a very huge game changer, because in the hardware world, very many customers have been traditionally been locked into what we call vendor lock-in. And every vendor tries to hide their design principles. They try to hide the innovation so that they can make as much of a kill in the market based on that. But with open compute, then we are bringing the whole concept of open source software now to the infrastructure world, and that's a total game changer. It will see the cost of acquiring these solutions that even hyperscalers use go down dramatically, which will free up a lot of capex for our customers. And then number two, with the rate of innovation that you can see with the open compute community, then definitely you are certain that you're not losing anything when it comes to performance, to scalability, to security, to the impact and the effectiveness of this solution. So this is our perspective of what open compute should be, something that business computing at the enterprise level shouldn't be something that costs you an arm and a leg, but it should not compromise on all those things that I've mentioned, especially when it comes to scalability and performance.
Yeah, I like that definition, the way that you compare it with open source software and that community-based engineering effort across hardware.
Indeed, those are the merits. If you have storage at a fraction of what you would pay your traditional providers, you have compute, especially now that we are seeing a hyper proliferation of applications. Think about the Internet of Things, for example, and we are seeing a lot of use cases. Think about things like driverless cars. If you think about the data that is streamed by, say, a moving vehicle all that data really to store it in proprietary hardware would not make a lot of sense because of the volume, the sheer volume of it, and the velocity at which that data is generated. So that's where open compute is becoming now very, very much handy to save our customers and to enable a lot of innovation, whether by businesses, think of about telcos, think about banks, or any other business that you might think of.
Great points, Joe. So now, Paul, you have a background from an OEM provider in your earlier days. So talk to us a little bit about the decision to move specifically toward open hardware, and how are you seeing that as a business model differentiator in the market?
So the evolution, Steve, of the business strategy is really our own experience. In 2016, 2017, we were looking to build our cloud platform, Savannah, and also a digital learning platform called iLearn. And we wanted to own the whole stack. So we're looking at hardware providers and being probably a typical systems integrator back then, we looked at the OEM boxes that you could build cloud on and the software licensing models for cloud, and really thought back to what we'd seen Facebook doing and some of the press around that. And our implementation of Savannah in particular was based on new OCP and Sesame circular economy equipment to build the platform on. And the results are really compelling, and we've seen them in some of the wins we've had in customers in the last 6 months, that the CapEx reductions can be anything from 50 to 80% less than an OEM option. Our licensing fees are massively reduced. Our support costs, our co-location space, our greenhouse gas emissions, all of these areas were massively reduced. And I think the obvious strategy was, well, if it's good enough for us, then it's certainly good enough for our customers. And we're starting to see that in enterprise, in cloud service providers, ISPs, mobile operators, and public service in Kenya in particular. So it's a very logical business because we've seen it and we've experienced, and we can talk to customers. We still have our expertise in the likes of Oracle, Cisco, etc., and we can help customers take that migration path either to private cloud, hybrid cloud, or public cloud, but all based on OCP accepted and inspired equipment.
Yeah, see, I think with the background that you guys have in delivering traditional hardware, you're going to be able to help customers through this migration as you see the benefits, and you can easily demonstrate, saying, here's the way it used to be, and here's what you can get by moving to open hardware. Now, Dan, with all of these benefits and the numbers that Paul just shared around the CapEx and the OpEx reduction and the sustainability, part of this is also educating the broader community. So not just businesses, but government and public sector around the benefits of open hardware. So in your experience, is the Kenyan government doing anything specific to promote open standards and open software and open hardware?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Indeed, the Kenyan government is in the forefront, and I think probably the only government in Africa that we've seen take concerted efforts to promote the use of both open hardware as complete infrastructure, or open designs where you can get designs and do local manufacturing for the same, and also open source software. So just a couple of months ago, there was a gazette notice by the Ministry of ICT in Kenya that directed all government ministries to consider open first. So whether it's open hardware, and a specific clause in that gazette notice said that whenever there's an open source solution or an open source option, the government of Kenya will buy open. So I think that's a very direct and deliberate move by the Kenyan government. And we think this is just the starting point of adoption of open source in both public and private sectors. We've seen a lot of customers now being interested in open source, especially even when COVID kicked in. and customers are asking, are we able to do things differently than you were doing before? How are we going to save money on infrastructure, on keeping lights on support, on buying new software? And government ministries are also being encouraged to share code or share applications that are being used by different departments so that they don't buy in silos. And this is a natural fit for open source software, because if you are using open source, for example, email on one department, you do not need to go and buy new licenses for the next department or ministry. So there's a heavy adoption of the same. Currently, in terms of uptake, probably 10-15% of applications are running on open source, but we expect to have these numbers go up in the near future.
I can imagine the growth being quite significant, and it's I guess one of the very few positive benefits that has come out of this pandemic in the last year is this figuring out ways to do things differently, specific across the hardware. So that's an interesting point. So besides Kenya, which countries in Africa do you think are fast movers towards open source?
Yeah, Steve, thanks for the question. I would love to single out specific countries, but what I would say is that considering African countries are over 90% of them are developing, I would say open computing and open source becomes a natural thing for them, because they have to juggle the development efforts across so many domains. So technology should not be one of them, and I think open source, open computing plays a huge part in saving the coins that are needed to help these economies to come up. So of course there are trailblazers with the likes of South Africa, the likes of Kenya, the likes of Egypt, the likes of Morocco, Nigeria, and Ghana. But pretty much every other African country is really a good fit for this, and we are seeing a lot of traction across the continent. Thank you.
That's very, very good points, Joe. And it'll be interesting to see how the different countries in Africa move in open source and how who adopts it faster across the continent. So, Paul, you had mentioned earlier that you have this platform on iLearn, and that's how you got started in the world of open compute. You have other platforms on OCP. How are you seeing the adoption of these platforms, and then what other platforms do you have scheduled to develop on OCP?
Yeah, so if you look at our business model there is a role for private cloud around building OCP solutions on premise. Savannah is very much our public cloud and our private cloud, hybrid cloud, I beg your pardon, which we've been deploying into enterprises in various formats. So we have backup as a service, infrastructure as a service, disaster recovery as a service, plus virtual machines being delivered across a number of enterprises and public sector organizations at the moment. And then on top of Savannah, there's, as you say, the software as a service. So for example, iLearn. So the content around iLearn is distributed to around about 20,000 public schools in Kenya. 500 private schools are using the system. Plus, as a digital learning platform, there's around about 10 enterprises that particularly buoyed by the pandemic and the remoteness of some of our working, then online digital learning has really met the need for them. And as well as that, the content behind iLearn, the curriculum, is approved by the KICD to grades 1, 2, and 3 here. So great success and real justification for the business model. And I think the lower input costs around CapEx and OpEx of OCP is a critical element within having a competitive go-to-market offering in those spaces.
I really like the digital learning platform, and the numbers that you're exhibiting in that area is great. And I wish more companies around the world would be looking at that type of model. So in general, how is your support model different between OCP and the OEM hardware? Because this is a big deal with enterprises saying, well, if I work with XYZ, they're going to give me 24/7 support, and I have this really strong agreement with the OEM. When they move to an open hardware model, the support, is it different? Is it the same? And if so, how?
Thank you, Steve. The support around OCP hardware is what I'll call support on steroids, because support comes in two parts. So all hardware is disaggregated. So whether it's storage, switch, or server. So with whichever, whether it's the network operating system we are using, or we are using virtualization solutions, for example, like Red Hat or VMware, running on OCP equipment, we will have, of course, the vendor support backed up by Atlancis support on the software component. On the hardware, on the other end, that's why I'm saying the support on steroids, because we actually keep physical servers either at customer premises or in our premises to support them. So we are not going to replace a disk or a memory that is failed. For open compute, for example, approved solutions, we replace the whole node. And this is the same support and delivery model that hyperscalers use. So if the server has gone down, we replace the whole server because we can afford to stock complete kits of this equipment on site or at our warehouse. And whenever there's a fault, we will replace this on the fly. On the software aspect, of course, we still keep the OEM support, whether it's network operating system, whichever product we are working with, we still keep that in place. But in terms of the infrastructure, we have all kits on site or at our warehouse, and we replace them whenever there's a fault. So the support is much, much better. We're able to see better uptimes at a much cheaper cost than compared to what OEMs will do.
Those support costs really impact the bottom line. And I think if that support story is told more efficiently across the open communities, people would start to move quicker toward open hardware just because of that support model that you guys offer. So how has the relationship with OCP impacted your business, and what do you see as the value of being part of an open source community, whether it be software or hardware?
It's been a great journey being part of OCP for the last 2 years. We're also, as you know, part of the Telecom Infra project around open networking. And it's a really refreshing culture to work across the value chain with organizations that have a common goal. I think to some degree, Atlancis is standing on the shoulders of giants. You've got the Facebooks, the Amazons of the world who are practicing this business model mostly internally, but our ability to leverage that for marketing, on our supply chain, et cetera, are really business changing, which is what we've seen. And our go-to-market proposition, our ability to market ourselves with some of these enormous brands, even the ODMs, which don't have the brand presence of the OEMs, but certainly do have the size and the gravity. It allows us to be part of the think tanks. So I know Dan and myself are part of early product development in terms of OCP and TIP, and Joe, as our technology evangelist, will be joining those as wherever he can as well. So it's a real differentiator for us. We're also listed on the OCP marketplace, which again, standing on the shoulders of giants, gives us a lot more bang for the buck than we would normally have. So it's great, and hopefully Atlancis is contributing just as much back as we're receiving from OCP.
I love the involvement in working together in mutual open source organizations like OCP, TIP, ONF. All of those are great ways to leverage and extend your business, and you guys are doing a great job of it at Atlancis. So what's next in the coming year for Atlancis overall? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I think Atlancis will continue leveraging on the corporations and partnerships that we've built within the OCP community. Atlantis is 100% focused open first company. So whether it's open software or open hardware, we want to continue holding on those ethos and building much more our capabilities to reach as many customers as possible. We are extending our capabilities in terms of even human resource to have more people dedicated to take the good message to customers that really need to hear about open compute. And that's why we have people like Joe now taking that evangelism role as a personal effort. And Joe will be at the forefront of teaching and educating and preaching the open messaging to our customers. And we are happy to note that the progress has been immense. Last couple of months, we've had very good wins within our open product portfolio, and we look forward to more opportunities that are already in the pipeline for the next coming couple of months. Thank you.
I can see that there will be a lot more stories coming out of Kenya in the open hardware movement based on some of the things that you're working on. So Dan, Joe, Paul, thank you very much for sharing a bit of your insight and the background on Atlancis. I love what you guys are doing down in Africa and look forward to more great partnership success in the future. I will be back with my key takeaways from my conversations with Atlancis in a little bit, but thanks again, Joe, Paul, and Dan.
Thank you, Steve.
Most welcome, Steve.
There were a few takeaways from my conversation today with Daniel and Joe and Paul from Atlancis. The first is how the team at Atlancis came to appreciate the benefits of open compute by using it internally for their iLearn platform. Paul mentioned CapEx reductions of 50 to 80% compared to OEMs. He also mentioned the reduction in licensing cost, support cost, as well as greenhouse gas emissions through OCP designs. The second is Daniel's comment around the Kenyan government's policy of open first, evaluating open source initiatives and alternatives first before anything else, and how that will be really key to driving open infrastructure across Kenya. And even how the recent pandemic has caused government entities to collaborate more and share more. And lastly, it was Joe's comment on open source not only being relevant and important in Kenya, but how it will be critical and crucial for the rest of the developing countries in Africa to drive open source software and open source hardware to achieve massive growth. So my thanks again to the team at Atlancis, and I highly recommend taking a look at their OCP solutions on our marketplace. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to introduce you to the team at Atlancis. You can reach me at steve@opencompute.org.